Will PvP-focused MMORPGs always fail? This is something I see perpetuated on occasion and rarely challenged. And why would people challenge these views or speculations? I mean, let's be blunt here. Player versus player centric MMOs haven't been particularly successful, especially not the levels of success we have seen in player versus environment MMOs such as World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XI and XIV, Guild Wars 2, and then sort of the PvE centric founding father in the form of EverQuest. PvP centric MMOs would of course be games such as Dark Ages of Camelot, Shadowbane, Ultima Online, Darkfall Online, and Warhammer Online. These MMOs have mostly come and passed, some being ancient at this time and others, well, the original iterations no longer existing. Some we consider failures, some even catastrophic failures, all of which shared a central theme focused on player versus player interactions. When I say that these games are PvP centric, I mean that PvP is the largest part of the endgame. It's integral to the very game itself. These are quickly defined as hardcore sorts of games. Based on these MMOs' failures and the success of PvE-centric MMOs, we would think that the case is rather closed in regards to which model is better or at least has more longevity. Sure, we have our outlier in EVE Online, a hardcore PvP space simulator of sorts with the ability to lose your ship in battle, but the top 4 MMOs right now in terms of numbers are Guild Wars 2, WoW, ESO, Final Fantasy XIV. All of these titles would be, well, quite obviously PvE-based MMOs with casual PvP influences such as things like instance PvP, little to no territorial warfare, and no loot, partial or full loot. PvE-based MMOs are king right now, and there's no denying that. But I think it's not only disingenuous to say that PvP-focused MMORPGs can't work, it's plain wrong. First, we have to look at the PvP MMORPGs that have come and gone, and ask the question of if PvP was the largest reason that the said game failed. Let's take a look at a couple comparisons between these PvE-centric and PvP-centric MMOs. I created a helpful graphic to illustrate some clear differences. Sources in the description. The graphic on screen shows the combined budget of the 5 PvE MMOs that I chose, compared to be as much as $963 million. For the PvP MMOs, we've got a mere $112.8 million. In terms of dev team sizes, PvE MMOs total at over 1,079 devs, with an average team size of 215. For the PvP MMOs, we've got a total of 285 total dev team size, with an average dev team size of 57. The PvE MMOs mentioned had nearly a 200 million average budget, while the PvP MMOs had somewhere between 22 and 30 million on average. This made, again, on average, a PvP MMO's budget 10 times less than that of a PvE game. It also made the development team on average to be nearly 5 times as less. These are about as accurate numbers as I could possibly obtain, and it's very clear to me seeing these numbers that PvE-focused MMOs have had far larger budgets as well as developer teams. So comparing the two groups of MMOs together should be done with these statistics in mind. It's not an equal comparison or an equal race of sorts. If things like dev team size and budget aren't even remotely close to being equal, then how can you really come away from this saying that, well, on equal footing, PvE has been proven to be the better sort of title, especially when you look at Battle Royale games right now, which that and along with MOBAs are really the top games played, and those are very much PvP experiences. So not only do these small companies who want to make these PvP projects, at least historically have been small companies that have tried to make these PvP MMORPGs, they've had a really uphill climb when attempting to create said MMORPG with their PvP vision. Especially with titans such as Nexon, NCSoft, and Blizzard existing in the space and quite frankly dominating the space. The other things to take into account are the primary reasons for the PvP MMOs failing. I have covered 3 of the games mentioned on the graphic so far: Warhammer Online, Darkfall Online, and Shadowbane. Feel free to watch these videos to form your own opinions on why those games failed, and then maybe come back and watch this video, or watch this video, listen to my opinions, then go formulate your own. But it's quite clear to me with these 3 titles that I mentioned in particular, PvP, or the fact that the game was focused on PvP, wasn't really the game's ultimate problem. Take Warhammer Online. It's the highest profile PvP MMO that we have ever had. But not only did it not have a, well, not so great engine, it had numerous direction changes in development and was rushed to release before it was finished. The PvE aspects, ironically enough, in most cases were the parts that people disliked the most. Well, maybe not so ironically. PvP, if anything, in Warhammer Online was its saving grace. Shadowbane is the oldest seeming of the titles listed, and this was a large reason it didn't do so well. With such poor UI as well as combat/gameplay engine, the game wasn't particularly smooth feeling. Shadowbane was an apartment idea between friends that's ambitious vision was far too much for them to accomplish. And finally, Darkfall Online, one of my favorite MMOs, was developed by a minuscule team in Greece, a team that had no previous MMO experience, as well as no serious publisher backing or funds. Darkfall had severe bugs and exploits present at launch, not to mention the game wasn't even properly purchasable during its launch. Let's be honest here. Is the fact that these games focused on PvP their largest issue per se? The issues that they couldn't have seen success because of? I'm confident in saying that out of all of these games' failures, them being PvP focused was not the primary contributor to their failure. One thing you have to take into account in the MMORPG world is although PvP and PvE are generally quite separate from each other, there is some clear resentment from the two groups. This is because in most MMOs, when things are balanced for PvE or PvP, it can oftentimes negatively affect the other side. This creates a bit of tension between the two groups. You have PvP games or PvP endgames in which you can kill someone who is PvEing, in some cases giving them severe consequences because of such. For a PvE player, this is a nuisance. They have little desire to PvP and it can be quite frustrated to be killed by a said PvP player. PvP players then in turn will curse at these said PvE players and call them Care Bears. It creates a very divisive culture in which PvP players see PvE players as Care Bears or casual players, while PvE players can see PvP players as nothing more than jerks, gankers, and just trigger-happy kids. There's no reason that we can't coexist in this space. And that's why it's frustrating to see players focused on PvE games badmouth PvP focused games or say go up in arms in the fact that they don't want to play it because PvP just always divulges to the same old. Look, if you don't like the game or the style of game of that nature, don't play it. What use is there going around being some type of doomsayer saying such games are just doomed to fail, especially when this isn't based on facts and is mostly sensationalized? You also have to admit that a PvP game is going to have a much more ambitious idea than a PvE game, and really is kind of a reason why it's such a niche product, or at least niche in comparison. In this current MMOscape, where games are mostly instants, which are much easier to spoon feed content into, PvP MMORPGs are often bold and quite imaginative, really sandboxy in some cases, to their detriment in some ways. So let's address some of the common complaints of PvP MMOs and determine if they are reasons that doom the genre to permanent failure of sorts. Why would you play an MMO for PvP? Couldn't you just play a MOBA or shooter? Those have PvP and don't require much of any sort of leveling or grinding. Well, us PvPers, me speaking for the MMORPG PvPers here, don't just play these sort of games because we first and foremost love to PvP necessarily. We also love MMOs. We love MMOs for what they are, being massive, persistent, always online. After a Counter-Strike match is over, you move on to the next game with little consequence or change. In an MMO, if my guild were to lose a key battle, we could potentially be set back tremendously, especially in the more hardcore PvP experiences. Losing means something in an MMO. Winning means something. You can wear better gear, be better leveled. We love PvP in MMO format because it's more persistent. There's more permanence. You can track your progress through a leveling or progression system over months, over even years in some cases. These are things that you can't get in some PvP game genre like a shooter or a MOBA. Sheeps versus wolves and the laws of attrition. Another commonly brought up topic in the question of wolves versus sheep is one that I outlined in both of my Shadowbane and Darkfall Online Death of a Game videos. To define my terms, a wolf in this case is a hardcore PvPer, or really just a hardcore player in general. A sheep is a casual PvPer or potentially just a PvE focused player. As you can observe in nature, when wolves have no natural predators and don't war amongst themselves, they could potentially completely eradicate a sheep population. Sheep players are the vast majority of MMORPG players, since not everyone is a hardcore player who plays 5 to 8 hours a day. Both PvE and PvP centric MMORPGs need sheep to function, and need sheep to be successful. PvP MMOs, however, do have more attrition in regards to these players becoming frustrated and potentially quitting. Especially because in these sorts of games, dying to a wolf can have severe consequences, such as you potentially losing all of the gear that you have on you. But to this complaint, I ask the question, why isn't everyone a criminal in real life? Well, due to consequences. Sure, some criminals can be successful in making money or harming others, but generally most end up jailed or potentially eliminated. So why don't we just blame all of these humans when said humans commit crimes? Why don't we just blame everybody? We also don't say that the entire system is screwed, do we? Just as the first humans experienced, you have to create some sort of moral system or law system to keep people from committing crimes. This is no different in an MMORPG. Developers have to give wolves incentive not to just feast endlessly on sheep. They have to give them penalties even. They have to help the sheep fight the battle against the wolves. There needs to be more metrics that prevent wolves from just feasting endlessly on sheep. There has to be activities for sheep to do, and which might not necessarily directly tie to PvP. So it's ignorant to just say that all PvP is doomed or not going to be successful, because clearly PvP is successful, hence why PvE focused MMOs even have PvP in it. Say for example recently, Final Fantasy XIV has started to adopt way more PvP in it. The key to making PvP work in an MMORPG is making sure you develop the right codes and rules to keep wolves from running too much amok. These rules could manifest in a number of ways: bounty systems, alignment systems, NPC guards, safe zones. You also need to make sure to implement enough activities that are besides PvP. Say for example, a crafting system, a housing system, a farming system, and etc. There has to be more activities than just PvP and just brutal full loot PvP in order for a sheep to want to keep playing the game, because remember, they're not exactly proficient in PvP or don't necessarily have the same amount of time to invest as the other hardcore players can. Look, I will freely admit most PvP-centric MMORPGs haven't done a good job of this. The best example of good rules in the PvP MMO is EVE Online. It has a simple security or sec system where you can get better loots in a low security or low sec section, but run into more chances to be killed. Or you could farm safely in a high security area to run into little to no risk of being killed. So yes, it's not just wishful thinking from me. CCP has proven that you can create ways to contain the wolves, at least enough to make the game fun and exciting for said sheep players. But when only the wolves remain, they can eat each other and the population ceases to exist. So yes, don't blame PvP, blame the systems that have implemented PvP. The only reason that people like to play PvP in an MMORPG is just to grief other people and make themselves feel better. Some PvE players have a strong distaste towards PvP players because at some point they were killed by one of them, at least probably. For some, they don't want to learn how to PvP, they just complain that they were able to be killed, period. And for others, they just can't keep up with the level of skill of a said PvPer might have. Sure, gankers exist. People whose sole intention is just to grief people and kill lower levels, but this is the fault of the developer, as I previously explained, more so than PvP itself. Once again, we can't blame human nature. We need to account for it. You need to create penalties for these players, but most PvP players don't PvP to grief or just make people feel bad. They PvP because it's competitive, and competitiveness is fun. Especially in some of these PvP MMORPGs where you have to be on your P's and Q's, it was an adrenaline rush at times. The fear of excitement of being discovered or discovering someone else, and at the more macro level, you have entire guilds who just want domination of the map. They want to conquer. They don't play the game to kill small fry, AFK crafters, or low-level PvEers. They just want to beat other powerful PvP clans head-to-head and show who the best clan is on the server. Realm versus clan versus clan. The likely strongest point that you can have as to why certain PvP titles are almost destined to fail is the age-old discussion of realm versus realm MMOs versus clan MMOs in regards to rates of attrition. It's much easier for a PvP title that focuses on clan versus clan warfare over factional warfare to cannibalize its players due to the nature of the games. One clan can become unbelievably strong and just stomp out other clans, especially if that game has full loot or things close to full loot, such as asset destruction, where that very strong clan can literally just eradicate other clans, cities, and hamlets and things like that. Although other clans could choose to work together in this sort of format, some don't due to the politics, and then you have a massive bleed of population. Whereas in RVR titles like Warhammer or Dark Age of Camelot, it's rather difficult to have one faction be overwhelmingly strong, as there are two other factions to balance things out. Not to mention, clans within a certain faction must work together, as it's the very basis of the game. You have to work together. RVR titles inherently breed more teamwork, which could contribute to a longer longevity as well as a slew of other things. To be completely honest, my mind isn't made up on this RVR versus clan debate. I love the individualism the clan versus clan system has, and I have appreciated how fresh it feels in games like EVE Online, Shadowbane, and Darkfall Online. But it's no question that this sort of system is the most volatile of the two systems, and because of such, is likely the riskiest in terms of properly working as a model. It's much easier to have a realm versus realm game because you don't have to worry about the whole player attrition thing nearly as much. I mean, look at the Crowfall team, for example. They came from Shadowbane, which was a clan versus clan system, and decided to switch to a realm versus realm system with 3 factions for their new project Crowfall. I mean, that's quite telling. So I absolutely think that the titles of the future, if they want to do a PvP-centric MMO, it's probably safer to go with a realm versus realm system, and it looks like most of them are going for that sort of system, if you look at Camelot Unchained and Crowfall, for instance. PvP MMORPGs since the beginning have typically been more niche games, but there's no reason that PvP MMORPGs and PvE MMORPGs can't coexist. And there's certainly nothing that proves that PvP MMORPGs are somewhat doomed and will never succeed. I'm not saying that there isn't issues in regards to games that marry these two factors, PvP and PvE, and how balance can really mess those sort of things up. I totally agree with that, which is why I think Guild Wars' approach in regards to separating these sort of skills in these different environments is probably the best way to go about balancing, but it makes it that much harder to balance at the start at least. Just looking at the horizon in terms of MMORPGs to come, and you have a strong amount of them being PvP focused. Camelot Unchained, Crowfall, Chronicles of Illyria, and even Darkfall Online has had a second go at it with its newest rendition titled Darkfall New Dawn, which is the game that I'm currently playing and enjoying. If all of these games fail with the level of backing and developer control that they now have, thanks to the Kickstarter platform, maybe we can revisit this topic, and I will be freely able to admit that I could possibly be wrong in my assertion that PvP MMORPGs aren't destined to fail. They just haven't been done right yet. Thanks for watching.